Hello and welcome to the webinar. My name is David Chu and I'm the Commerce Strategist at Elastic Path. This presentation is how to get your business selling in the API economy, and we're pleased to be presenting it together with SOA Software, the leader in API management and SOA governance products. With me today are two experts in the field, Andrew Lau, the Commerce Architect for API Orchestration Solutions at Elastic Path, and Sachin Agarwal, VP of Product Marketing at SOA Software. Both are top advocates of the power, flexibility, and benefits of pursuing an API-centric strategy, so I'm very excited to have them join us on this call today. Today we're going to talk about the benefits to your business of delivering capabilities in the form of APIs, and a little bit about the nature of those APIs that will help successfully scale, capture new opportunities, and generate new streams of revenue. And there are definitely some approaches and best practices that will help you maximize your impact in the digital economy while maintaining security, performance, and scalability, and that's what our guests are here to discuss today. So a little bit about us at Elastic Path. We empower people to create value from innovative digital experiences. So we design software and solutions that help companies monetize and generate revenue from digital customer experiences across every touch point, from wearables and websites, mobile apps, and of course API products. And we've done this for some of the very best brands in the world like Google, Time, Inc., Pearson, Garmin, and Symantec. And we also blog about these experiences at one of the biggest e-commerce blogs in the world, GetElastic.com, which contains a wealth of knowledge for today's digital businesses. Empowering the best digital experiences is often a highly effective API layer that brings the needed capabilities to marketers and users. And to do this, we're proud to partner with SOA Software. And to talk a little bit more about their company, I'm going to hand it over to Sachin Agarwal, who is the Vice President of Product Marketing for SOA Software.
Thanks, David. Excited to be here. And SOA Software is an API management and SOA governance leader. We have been around for more than 8 years. We are a profitable company. And we are in the business of essentially helping customers integrate their applications, and now with API management, take those applications and services and externalizing them as APIs and making them available in digital channels, various different types of digital channels. We have more than 300 customers, many of the recognizable names in Fortune 1000. Customers like Bank of America, Verizon, American Express, Pfizer, CVS Pharmacy, and so on and so forth. Our products are available both on-premise, and we also have cloud and SaaS-based offerings. So we offer a hybrid approach, so customers can choose where they want to deploy our products. And we are a Gartner and Forrester leader as well. So for today, I would like to start off with defining what is an API. Very, very basic. I mean, in terms of what an API is, an API came into evolution somewhere around 2006, 2007. And the primary goal of an API is to take your applications, take your services, what you as a company have to offer, and programmatically expose them for consumption within your customer's channel. So wherever your customer is, if your customer is through mobile devices, if your customers are on e-commerce channels, or if they are at their home, accessing your products and services through television or through smart sensors or anything like that. An API essentially is a way of exposing them and making your APIs, essentially your products and services, available to a large set of developers so that you don't need to develop user experience of application, all these different devices or channels. You make them available to developers, external developers, who can take your application and services and then develop specific apps or specific services on these different channels. So getting on to the next slide. So what has API, API has led to something what we call as an API economy. And what the API economy is, essentially, it has led enterprises, all major enterprises, to take their functionality, to take their products and services and extend it to a wide variety of different channels. tablet, web apps, smartphones, mobile devices, connected appliances, and essentially allowed them to monetize their data, to monetize their services across these different channels. And that's where essentially the digital commerce aspect, the digital economy aspect of APIs comes in. It essentially lets your company take their products and services, package them as products in the form of API, and then monetize them through these various different channels where your customers are spending more and more and more time. If you look at any specific customer now, the engagement rates on mobile are obviously through the roof. We don't need to talk about that. But then there are channels like IoTs, and people are spending more and more time in their car, and the cars are becoming more interactive. Even the homes are becoming more interactive. And every large enterprise, big or small, need to think about how to engage customers through all these digital channels. And then obviously at the end of the day, they want to monetize their products and services. And that's essentially what the API economy is. It's facilitating the commercialization of these digital channels.
So Sachin, when you say they're commercializing it, are they identifying sort of new opportunities, adjacent possibilities in their business, or are they just monetizing existing products, services, and offerings that their organization has just in a new way via APIs? In your experience, what do you think is the mix of sort of new opportunities versus new ways of distributing existing or older opportunities?
That's a great question. So what essentially APIs have enabled is one is obviously they're taking their existing products and services and making them available in these new channels. But it has actually opened up a lot of new opportunities. So if you look at one of those new opportunities, the first thing that comes to my mind is, like, in terms of innovation, look at Twitter. And when I talk about Twitter, it's not the innovation about 140-character tweets. I mean, that they have been doing for a while. But they really had a big challenge on how to monetize their platform. And obviously, advertisement was one thing. They're trying to go and place advertisements and monetize through advertisement. But when they started exposing the API, the tweets as APIs, what they found was there was a large ecosystem of these marketers who wanted an access to all the tweets that were happening through an API, which they could analyze and do segmentation analysis and do targeting and analyze the hell out of those data. And Twitter found a way to monetize those APIs. They have something called a fire hose, where a selected set of partners get fire hose access, and they're charging them big bucks. So that's essentially allowed them to monetize their API. The Netflix case is very, very unique. It allows them, Netflix obviously has these content, these digital media, movies, and TV series, and they want their content to reach out to as many consumers and as many devices out there. And there are now thousands and thousands of devices. Android itself has, I guess, 4,000, 5,000 different variants. So they just open an API to their content and let external developers go and take that content and develop unique experiences for these different devices. And they just monetized on their subscription, which is any customer who comes to Netflix can subscribe directly with Netflix, but then their services are available in all the devices. Support new devices is kind of, I've already mentioned, but then a lot of new devices like Internet of Things that are coming out, like the Nest sensors. Your home is going to be connected. Everything in your home, your refrigerator, your cooking range, your iron, I don't know what else. I mean, everything is going to be connected. There are a lot of opportunities over there to use API and actually embed digital commerce. Your refrigerator is going to tell you when you're running out of milk. Discover new business model. Twilio is actually disrupting. It's completely disrupted the telecom market. Instead, what they have made is through very simple APIs with a very small flat charge, they have made telecom services like SMS messages or instant messaging or telephone calls and things like that available as APIs. Wherein the traditional model was somebody had to go sign up a huge contract with one of the large telecom vendors, pay them some big amount of front, and now Twilio is like for 5 cents, any developer, any startup can come in and start using that for a flat rate. And Salesforce is another one, which is they have just completely increased their partner network by exposing their functionality through APIs, and now they generate more than half of their user interaction to Salesforce happens through APIs, not through their UI or web experience, but through the APIs. So there are a lot of, this is just a subset of opportunities that we are seeing. I'm sure you guys are seeing a lot on your end in terms of commerce.
We have a lot of customers that are using APIs just to increase their partner network, to let their resellers, distributors interact with their commerce APIs to place orders, to try innovating on the content layer, to put up new microsites on the fly, put up new CMS componentry, try out all these other apps and widgets that they just couldn't do before. And so, we even have an internal team at Elastic that's playing with Google Glass and trying to figure out how can we embed the commerce experience in Google Glass and use that as part of the interactive experience overall, including the online channel. So it's going to be very exciting over the next little while as this increases our capability to try out new things. So, yeah, totally agree.
And I think it's probably important to point out as well that, although these examples are sort of marquee examples of sort of new economy, startup or, disruptive companies, that I don't think there's really anything stopping a traditional 100-year-old company, and we've got customers in our client base that are literally 150 years old. There's nothing really stopping those companies from sort of jumping on the same opportunities and supporting new devices and increasing their reach, even discovering new business models within their existing products and offerings to almost disrupt the disruptors, if you think about it that way. Yeah.
No, I totally agree on that. I know that the companies on this slide so far are some of the newer, younger companies and so on. But yeah, I totally agree. We've seen a lot of traditional companies also jump on the API space just to allow them to disrupt the disruptors, as you said.
So, now that we've identified, some of the opportunities in the API economy, and I guess, the next question that our audience is going to be, how do I, jump on this bandwagon? How do I go about adopting an API strategy?
Yep. That's actually a very, very deep question. And very quickly, the way I like to look at it is segment into very 4 simple steps, and I'll quickly go through them. The first one, obviously, I call accelerate digital channels, which is essentially, like you guys said, making your products and services available as APIs. And this is not only the new companies, like I mentioned in my earlier slide, but like you guys were saying, like any large enterprises, they can make their existing products and services and package them as APIs. But once you have made it available as a well-designed API, the next step is, and a very important step around this, is drive API adoption. And drive API adoption with your partners, with a large set of developers. So there's a lot of developer evangelism. You need to go and market your API. You need to support your API. You need to do hackathons. And the whole provisioning and onboarding of APIs and documentation of API has to be really, really made easy. So essentially, you have to make your API, design your API as a product and market it. The third thing is monetize, which is a lot of companies now are monetizing their APIs. There might not be a direct correlation with monetization. There might be an indirect. So like Twilio, like I mentioned, Twitter, they're all directly monetizing their API in the sense every time you use an API, they'll charge you something. So there's a billing aspect to API. But then in the Netflix case, there's an indirect monetization. They're making their APIs available for free. Anybody can come and use them and make their content available on different devices, as long as they get more consumers who directly come to them and subscribe to their services. Their APIs are free. So there's a monetization aspect. And then finally, the most important aspect is analyzing these APIs. There's a lot of information about your interactions, how customers, how partners, how developers are interacting with your business. You get fine-grained information about which devices are getting monetized the most, from where people are accessing, what kind of people are accessing, what type of services are they accessing. So analyzing all of that and then feeding it back into the circle. But I think these are like 4 very, very simple steps that any enterprise should look into when they are rolling out an API strategy.
So I got a question for both of you guys. Like as a business user, I mean, I think that when I look at identifying opportunities in terms of digital channels, creating some kind of business model, monetization model around my digital assets, doing an analysis, I mean, those aren't necessarily easy, but at least I can understand them. They're within the realm of my sort of business knowledge. But I come across the question a lot, when I go out into the field and talk to customers and prospects, how do you drive adoption? If I create a new API product, I did my analysis, I believe this is a good digital channel for me to reach in and create a product around, I create a high quality API, but unless it's adopted by the public, by developers, it's just going to sort of wither and die. I mean, what are 2 or 3 things that you can really do to drive adoption? Because I think out of all of those 4, a business audience is going to be, that's the one that I don't understand. That's the one I'm really having trouble wrapping my head around and seems risky to me.
Yeah, and then David, I think you hit the right point there. You need to drive adoption via developers, and then that's really who's going to be consuming the APIs directly. And we're going to be touching on that a bit later about the developer experience and how critical that is. And I don't think developer experience just means having a nice and nicely designed API. It definitely is the ecosystem around that. All your documentation, all your samples and examples and references against the API, all your SDKs against the API. Everything from the experience of signing up to access the API, getting your keys, and actually having a running example in a matter of minutes. That's how you get people to adopt it really quickly, in addition to your actual business model.
Right.
Right. I agree. I mean, I think, Drew, you touched all the aspects, and I think one of the things over there is when companies come to us and they roll out an API, to do all of that, we suggest that they do hackathons, wherein to create a repository and best app approach, have some developers come in, give them some low-hanging fruits or prizes, and have them develop it, which generates a lot of examples of how your API can be used, and then you start developing a bigger community around it.
So I see, as we move on through these slides here, we mentioned driving adoption, and part of that is obviously having a quality API that does its job, it does it well. And I see that we're talking a little bit about some of the characteristics of those APIs, and the first one I hear is about security.
Yep. And security is actually a very important aspect. So once you drive your adoption of your API, you need to drive the adoption. You need to make your API design and concentrate on your API design really, really well. But at the end of the day, when you're driving commerce through your digital channels, you need to make sure that your APIs are extremely secure. I mean, what was known it was called the holiday hack season, like last December. You saw Snapchat API getting hacked, and obviously Target and Neiman Marcus and a lot of other retailers got hacked. So as customers are exposing their APIs, they need to be really, really cognizant about how do they secure their APIs. And there are a couple of things over here. The first one is authentication, authorize your user, which is you make sure who's coming in and they have the right rights to use them. You also need to control not only the users, but also the apps that are using your APIs. So there's an aspect of licensing, which is which app can access my APIs and what they can access. There's rate limit, which is you need to control how many times they can call your API, or what operations they can call on your APIs and what time of the day they can call it. You need to protect it from hackers. There are a lot of strategies around how you can protect your API, because the APIs can get hacked. I mean, they're increasing the surface area more than web applications, because web applications, once you have on a web device or a web page, there are only so many ways they can interact on the web page. It's kind of a logged user interface. API is a programmatic interface. Somebody finds an API, they can figure out multiple ways of using it and then hacking. And finally, in terms of commerce, PCI compliance is extremely important in terms of your credit card information is flowing through this API. So how do you make sure that all your personal PII information, which is personally identifying information, remains secure? And it's not only related to credit card information. What PCI compliance essentially implies is that your entire infrastructure that's running your e-commerce platform, that's running your API platform, is compliant to PCI, which is there's a huge checklist of things that you have to go when you're going through a PCI compliance, which is high availability, backup and recovery, how you protect your data, how do you audit your data. So all of those things are essentially making sure that your commerce infrastructure and API infrastructure is extremely hardened.
And just to layer on some kind of practical examples of what we've experienced, I think when we viewed how to deploy our Commerce API via Cortex and how we'd split up some of the security concerns, we looked at it that there's definitely some aspects of security that are cross-cutting. And therefore, for us, not areas that we want to specialize in and have our team, try to address some of those concerns. Security itself is difficult, and it's not something that you want your team to do, if it's the first time doing it. So either you have to go out and grab some consultants who are very specialized in the security field, or you look at a solution like SOA to offload some of these aspects too, and that's what we chose to do in this case. So aspects that cut across the API, such as throttling, such as distributing app IDs and keys, and then confirming security certificates coming from applications, all that happens before hitting our API itself. And for us, we're very happy to offload that because, as I said, that stuff is quite difficult to handle. The thing that we decided to keep inside our application, however, was the roles-based access control. So denying access to a specific URL and access to a specific resource in the API was kind of intrinsic to our API itself. Commerce itself is fairly fine-grained in sync with our hypermedia-style resources. So the fact that we have to protect this cart from other people that don't own it, and this payment details from other folks wasn't quite offloadable to the API gateways in its current mode. Something we're going to explore a bit later, but because that was intrinsic to our application, how a developer interacts with the application, we decided to keep that within our application itself.
Would you say that's a sort of early architectural decision that right up front you sort of decided that, it's those aspects of security that you would want to handle intrinsically to the API and those ones that you wanted to offload to a product like SOA?
Yeah, so we focused on creating, the best API design via the hypermedia style that we could for our developers. But that meant that from that point of view, the things that didn't affect the style of API we ended up choosing, like the throttling and so on, that would be something that we'd apply regardless of the style of API we chose to create. So I think anything like that was definitely the aspect that we would want to push to an API gateway to handle.
Right, and that's absolutely right. So if you look at what the API gateway does, what it does is it handles the mobile interaction or the user interaction on the app, and what can happen is there's various different kind of authentication schemes, which is it could be simple LDAP LDAP authentication, it could be OAuth, it could be OpenID. It could be SAML. So various different kind of tokens can be there, and it could be a Facebook login in the sense that you could use a social login instead of just providing your. So there's a lot of technology that's sitting in all that. There's a lot of options that are sitting out there through which you want to, depending upon how you want to make your user experience really, really easy, how you want to capture the credentials from the app. So what Gateway does is it takes those different credentials, it complies to all these different standards, it can actually mediate across all these different standards, and once it has done that, what it hands off is it hands off the real single sign-on, which is role-based access control and single sign-on, to either the application itself, in this case the API that is controlled by Elastic Path, or in a lot of cases, like in our enterprise use cases, we can just hand authorization and RBAC to enterprise systems like Oracle Access Management and Enterprise Access Management systems like from CA or IBM or other things. So, like all the tokens over there, I guess one of the things that's most often used is OAuth, and I guess, Drew, you guys have a lot of experience with OAuth, so why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, actually, we initially started down implementing our own OAuth in our application. We still have it. I wouldn't say we cover all aspects of OAuth because OAuth itself is actually quite hard. It is one of those areas where if you haven't done it before, you could try to pick up an open source library and take advantage of that to provide some of the functionality, which is what we did. This is a common Elastic Path approach. But even then, it was really difficult because we didn't implement all aspects of it. We still don't have a refresh token currently, and we still haven't confirmed, does this work with Facebook's OAuth or Twitter's OAuth? And that's something that we initially thought we could own, but after a while we decided, well, this makes sense to see if we can integrate with a SOA software solution to handle the OAuth because they have a richer set. So in this case, it was important for our overall architecture to test against an API gateway to make sure that we essentially separated several concerns. So when you look at OAuth, it does address a lot of things like authentication, identity, access control. But if you don't look at that correctly in your application, they tend to get too intermingled, and then when you try to offload some of that functionality to an API gateway, that means that you actually have to do a lot of rework of your application to do so, because if you've actually intermingled them too much. So that was for us a hard lesson for us to learn, because we probably should have started with the API gateway instead of trying to tuck it in after the fact.
Right. Yeah, and in the API gateway, obviously, we have something called an OAuth server that simplifies a lot of these things. One of the other things with just managing security, especially in e-commerce terms in licensing, you need to control what apps can really access your APIs. And then you need to package your APIs in different kind of licenses. So just for instance, I mean, in like working with Elastic Path, we have seen like the e-commerce API can be used in different ways. I mean, it can be used by the retailer themselves or a company themselves for their mobile app experience, in which case they want like platinum level, which is all APIs, all functions, and highest level of throughput. But sometimes when they want their API to appear in kind of a partner retailer, like if they want it to appear maybe in like an Amazon store or some other store, they want to restrict the number of calls. They might want to restrict the number of products or what kind of operations can be done. So there's a big aspect of controlling or packaging your APIs in different forms for different apps, and the way you do it is through API keys. I mean, you just create a different API key for each different consumer of your API, which controls the level of access they have, and this also protects your whole backend infrastructure from unrestricted use as such.
Yeah, we're coming across this quite often in, for example, some of the omni-channel retail scenarios and use cases that we're working with, where we're surfacing e-commerce functionality, and then there are websites, there are mobile apps, as you mentioned, there's sort of partners that are throttled, that sort of have a limited subset of this functionality, and then if you've got the retailers themselves creating, for example, an iPad app for store associates in store, it's obviously unthrottled. It has sort of full access to the capabilities because they're shopping on behalf of customers, they're looking up inventory live. But it's all it's the same infrastructure behind it. You're just sort of managing it with licensing and API packaging. Is that right?
Yep. That is right. And then the other aspect is not only, so the licensing aspect is obviously what functionality or what services I have. An additional aspect on top of it, which is kind of similar, which is quota management, rate limiting, or monitoring, which is more about restricting the number of calls and monitoring it very effectively, wherein sometimes you just want to restrict the number of calls that are coming from a mobile application or the number of calls that are coming from a specific region. You don't want a specific region, or like if you have a multi-country global deployment of your API, you want to restrict the number of e-commerce capabilities that you're getting from a specific country from Africa, because you don't expect, and certainly if you see a big load coming in from there, you just want to restrict it. It might have got hacked. Even though the key is right, if it's coming from a specific region, you just want to make sure that that's not happening from different aspects or different regions. So there's some aspect of quota management and rate limiting that comes into force as well.
And Andrew, for in the case of Elastic Path, this is sort of the no-brainer functionality that really should be handled by a gateway, and it's the stuff that SOA is handling rather than anything internal to the Elastic Path APIs. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, and that's actually how we're using it to run some of our things like partner programs and some of our pre-sales engagements. We're actually opening up our API to the partners and the prospects, and they have different rate limits and different quotas and different license agreements to help address their different concerns in terms of how they're engaging with their API. So yeah, we're already using this as part of our own process.
Right, and one of the things that always comes up, of course, is performance and reporting.
Yeah, for us, similar approach to security. There are definitely aspects of performance and reporting, in this case the monitoring and reporting aspects, that we feel is best handled external to the API. Traditionally, if we had to do this, we probably would have set up our own kind of custom proxy to measure, okay, what are our response times, are we meeting our SLA threshold, what are our error rates or failure rates. In this case, this made sense to have it all taken care of in one place by the API gateway, because they'll have that perspective on how are we doing overall in the API system. The aspect we are keeping closer to our system is probably the actual business reporting. This is more of the domain-specific data that's using the context of the API, the actual subject, the actual shopper, the user, and what's being accessed, whether that's your shopping cart or your purchase or the recommendations that are coming through the API itself. That is what we're capturing within the API itself as part of our data tap process, just because we feel that's data intrinsic to the overall system that we're using to generate more personalization. So that is stuff we're keeping internal, but we will mix in the API reporting and monitoring from the API gateway to see is the system healthy and so on.
So that's a similar decision to the security, where you have sort of intrinsic domain-specific stuff that you feel just should be part of the API itself rather than the external gateway, and then you kind of have the other pieces that are not, that are outsourced.
That's correct, and that again lets our product team focus on the domain-specific stuff, because that really is our bread and butter.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So one other specific thing that the API gateway does is, looking at the API, you can really protect your API because there's some very specific characteristics and there are very specific vulnerabilities in APIs that could be used as attack vectors by hackers. So like denial of service. Denial of service with APIs is quite often used by hackers. So preventing denial of services. Doing kind of content filtering, so making sure your content is not malformed. So looking at your JSON or XML data structures and making sure they're well formed. Looking at SQL injections, a lot of SQL injection queries. I mean, it's extremely well known in the web application world. But similarly, malformed JSON, XML, or even SQL injection query can be used in APIs. So scanning them for all these malformed contents, SQL injection, scanning for viruses. These are things that can be done with the API gateway, and it's a self-learning process as well. I mean, the more we process, the more way the gateway can know how APIs are getting hacked, and it can improve its algorithm on an ongoing basis to prevent these hacks. So the other thing with now coming from raising from the security aspect, I guess we have discussed a lot around security. The next thing that's very important in terms of consuming APIs for customers, specifically when you're exposing digital commerce capabilities to customers, is the user experience of how capable, how fast, how good looking your app is. And there are a couple of things over here that the API infrastructure, the API gateway infrastructure provides. One is your customers could be accessing your API from anywhere in the world. I mean, it's a global e-commerce platform. In that case, they could be coming from anywhere. So what the API gateway provides is a caching platform with data centers available all over the world, wherein it is routed to the nearest data center, and we cache multiple calls. If the same call is coming through a lot of users, is accessing the same API, it's accessing the same data, which is, let's for instance say what's the weather in Seattle, and everybody in Seattle is accessing that API. That's all cached in the data center. It can be accessed quickly. The other aspect, what the gateway does, is pagination, which is if you are doing search for a specific catalog or a specific thing, and it has hundreds of results, rather than sending it all to the mobile device and letting the mobile device wait till it pulls in all the 100 results or 100 or 200 results or whatever it is, those results can get cached in the API gateway, whereas it just sends a subset of that result to the mobile device. So these are different caching capabilities in order to scale your APIs as well as improve the customer experience of the app itself.
So we've spent the last sort of few slides talking about the characteristics of a good API, and going back to the original slide where we were looking at the sort of four aspects of this. Once you've sort of created an API, you've come up with a division between the gateway and something that's intrinsic to the API. You mentioned earlier the developer experience is extremely important to promote adoption and pickup of the API. You want to talk a little bit about the developer community and how important that is to the adoption of an API product?
Yeah, so in this case, I mean, developer experience is very similar to user experience. It's how you make the process of doing what you're supposed to do as a developer as simple and as pleasurable as possible. When you interact with something as a user with the system that has great UX design, you know it, you feel it, and it's not just the piece that you're interacting with, it's the overall experience. And I think that's what we have to realize with APIs. We could just stand up an API. We could be the best designed API in the world. We just stood it up. It may not be that successful just because there are a lot of alternative APIs out there. There are definitely a lot of commerce APIs out there, and it isn't just standing up the best one. So that means that when we look at the end-to-end process of how to experience an API, how to start developing against it, it really is the end-to-end experience. That has to be part of it. Your API itself, as great as it is, has to have the same level of interactive experience as the sign-up process. So how you sign up, how you access the API, how you view the interactive docs, how you get timely support, we should have the expectation that it should be just as good as your API design.
Yep. No, I agree. A lot about that around API and making your API effective is how you market it and how you make it easy for developers to onboard and provide documentation to them in order to use that API and give them a lot of examples. The other aspect of API that comes in is API orchestration and mediation, which is a lot of times in e-commerce, like we see, I mean, if you look at a web page, if you have an e-commerce experience on a web page, you get everything. You get the product catalog, you get the product image, you get the ratings, you get the reviews, you get the price. It's a large page. In terms of when it's been accessed from a mobile device, you essentially have to trim it down. So a lot of what the gateway can do is orchestration and mediation. And there are two different things. Mediation is essentially taking backend services and kind of orchestrating across the different protocols, if there are, and transforming SOAP to REST, REST to SOAP. And orchestration that the gateway does is more around kind of calling multiple different services and aggregation. So, Drew, I guess you guys do something specifically around mediation as well.
Okay, from a mediation perspective, a lot of the things that examples we'll see is really, for example, abstracting around payment gateways. A lot of our larger clients will have multiple agreements with payment processors, and they'll try to choose the right payment processor to get the best rate and to, really just minimize their overall cost. So one of the things we'll see with all the APIs is, okay, let's have a common payment API that is really mediate between 3 or 4 different payment processor APIs in the back end, just so that based on your region you're coming from and so on, we will let you actually go pick the right payment processor that makes sense, given all those types of decision points of, okay, which one is the optimal one to use in this scenario.
Right.
From a orchestration perspective, this is for us, usually a point of contention because we have a hypermedia style API, which in theory is meant to be versionless. That's one of the overall promises of hypermedia. And to do that, it adds some constraints to your client, your actual API consumer. They're supposed to only enter via a specific entry point and follow the right links and ignore link relations you don't recognize and so on. But at the same time, we want to give our overall client base options. So if for whatever reason we decide, okay, we actually need to version this API even though it's hypermedia based, that's something that intrinsically the API gateway is actually very good at supporting. Let them orchestrate between multiple API versions that are all running, and therefore we don't have to build in a bunch of that within the API itself. So that's kind of for us our kind of fallback solution if we ever run into a scenario where we actually have to start versioning our API deployments. Okay, the other aspect that we tend to rely on API Gateway for is talking about transformations. So for our space, we do see a lot of competing media types. I think that competition is healthy. It's in the API community itself, it's good to take a look at several different media type implementations, anything from Siren to HAL to collection JSON to collection.doc. This is just the start. Elastic Path and Cortex obviously has their own media type as well. And I think at some point we'll start to see some consolidation into using one or two of these or three of these as a given standard. But in the meantime, I think we have to start embracing the fact that our media type isn't going to be the one that necessarily everyone wants to be using. So we're looking at the API gateway layer to go, okay, let's transform our Cortex media type to Siren or to HAL. And so that's something we don't necessarily want to build in our code base. But given that these media types are very similar, even though not exact one-to-one, can we at some point start translating that from our media type to a different one? And that's something that we're actively exploring now, and that our hope is that we're going to do that outside of our specific application itself. The other half is content types themselves aren't as polarizing anymore. JSON, for the most part, seems to be winning due to, the developer experience. But XML is still useful in kind of a machine-to-machine world and still useful in specific contexts. So same type of argument there. If people still want to use XML, I think we should be open to that. And for us, again, we don't want to necessarily build that into our application itself, but we do need to transform our JSON responses to XML. That definitely is something that we've seen as possible with the API gateway, and that's really keeping us kind of open-minded about the future. What other content types are we dealing with? Are we going to be looking at binary-based formats in the future, or other aspects that are targeted just towards mobile devices? So as long as we keep ourselves open to that and see that we can have a gateway technology to actually implement that for us, I think that's going to let us future-proof that.
Yeah, Drew, that's a very, very important point that you just mentioned. I mean, we are already seeing, we have been traditionally SOA vendors. We have seen XML, then JSON came in. And right now, two specific protocols are coming up really, really fast. One is WebSockets. We are seeing WebSockets coming up really, really fast in terms of real-time applications, gaming, financial transactions. And I think that will become really, really important in our gateway. We are working on gateway to support that. The other one is MQTT, and MQTT is coming as a protocol that is very fast being adopted by the mobile, by IoTs, Internet of Things. So for Internet of Things, MQTT is a protocol that we see a lot of small device vendors, they're adopting it, and that's something that can be relied on the gateway as well.
Okay, so to bring it all together, we've talked about the different ways to identify market opportunities and to create API products that sort of put your business into the API economy. We've talked about the characteristics of what makes for a good API, how to sort of strategize and approach dividing the functionality between an API gateway and those that are intrinsic to your API. So, I just wanted to take a few minutes here to, rubber meets road and talk about a real world example where at Elastic Path we're creating an API product that combines digital commerce with content management. There's obviously aspects of API management that goes in there. Maybe you could start, Drew, talking a little bit about how all of the capabilities and characteristics that we've talked about sort of play out when you look at a real-world example of an API product that's being brought to market.
Yeah, I think it is the holistic viewpoint of, okay, this is a product, and just like any other product, it requires a whole strategy to launch it, and not necessarily just developing the API. And I think from us, from EP's perspective, we're starting to realize that this is a larger effort from a product marketing perspective than we just initially anticipated. So for us, it's definitely been an eye-opening experience. That API as a product itself means that there is the whole product life cycle to think about in terms of the adoption of the API.
Mm-hmm. And from you, Sachin, if we were to pick 2 or 3 items, I keep coming back to the whole developer adoption and how that, to me, seems to be a weak link in the chain. It's something that perhaps, especially the sort of old world companies struggle with a little bit, and where some API efforts fail when it just doesn't pick up. I mean, what advice can you give around taking an API product such as the one we're talking about here, and just boosting developer adoption and the palatability of this API product to the developer community?
Yep. And it's very important. I mean, you can have an API, you can design your API really, really well, but when the rubber meets the road, it's about how many developers you have, how you engaging your developers, and there are a couple of aspects over there. One is about API documentation. How well have you documented your APIs? There's an aspect around providing examples. I mean, at the end of the day, when developers are coming in, they're usually iOS developers or Android developers, or they have an example that they have already chosen the choice of language, whether it's JavaScript, or they're using Node.js or Android or something. So give them examples. The second thing that we have seen is usually APIs. I mean, a lot of APIs are actually becoming extremely large. So there's API documentation can go into pages and pages, a lot of different pages. So how do you kind of target these developers? So an aspect around that is find out what the developers really want to use. Things like dynamic documentation, depending upon the license that the developer has done, which is what kind of functionalities that the developer wants, just personalize the documentation to their licenses. And the third thing, which obviously works, it works in your e-commerce cases when you're going and marketing a product, you build a social community around it. Have people come and review your API, provide feedback on your API, provide nuggets, have the community itself provide nuggets around how your API is getting used, how it can be better used, give them a capability to provide feedback, file bugs. Just open your API and let the community contribute back. And these things really help. I mean, and creating organizing hackathons to kick this off and get the initial set of developers coming and start contributing is also a very important aspect.
Great, and we've gone through a lot of great information about bringing an API product to market, and I know that SOA Software has a few resources that you can mention here, Sachin.
Yep. So these are just 2 of the resources. I think they're very high-level resources. The first one is a very comprehensive API ebook. It provides all the information if you're kicking off any API project on how to secure, scale, build an API design. Second one is more kind of specifically targeted for enterprises who are rolling out a mobile strategy and how they should use APIs. But these are 2 resources, and there are a lot that you can find between ElasticPath and SOA Software if you go to our respective resource centers and websites.
Great, and of course, to those of you on the webinar, if you have any additional questions that you'd like us to answer, always feel free to reach out to us, either at info@elasticpath.com or info@soa.com, and we will get back to you. So I think that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank you once again, Andrew Lau of ElasticPath and Sachin Agarwal of SOA Software. Thanks for joining us on this call, and thank you to you for listening in. On a final note, for more information related to this subject, I would definitely encourage you at this time to obtain a complimentary copy of a research report that is on API strategy that we jointly conducted with Forrester Consulting, and you can download it using the link on your screen. It's got quantitative research as well as some concrete recommendations to get you started with your own API strategy.